Hi, this is Eternal King bringing you another LOR video today. So I wanted to talk about today a subject that I think is easily understood, easily misunderstood actually, in the Eternal format, and it is the power of stat spam, right? So the biggest stat spam deck in the game is Eddy Spectral Matron. So the power of this card, the text might as well read that when you have one version copy of Eddy in my deck will be bigger than your deck. Now, on the surface, that seems really, really good. You're putting out 10/10s like nobody's business. You're practically playing it like it's a mid-range deck because you're ramping into it in one way or another, and that seems very, very powerful. Your units are the biggest of boys in the game. If that's the case, well, why is something like my Ryze list winning every single game ever? As an off-meta list. Why was it that last season Bandletree was kind of the off-meta pick as an OTK Wincon that was piloted by some of the top players? So, we have Bandletree last season, we have my Ryze list this season. Why are these OTK combo decks essentially outperforming these massive stat spam decks that people believe are the meta in the format? They are the meta in the standard format, don't get me wrong, but we're talking about Eternal here. See, the thing is, as we get more control tools that get printed over time, more and more control tools for Shadow Isles and more control tools for Ionia, just more control tools in period, full stop. As we get more control tools, the ability to essentially play the biggest of boys gets diminished in value, right? So again, my 90% Ryze list that quite literally doesn't lose a game. I could call it a 100% Ryze list. I feel like that's a bit dishonest. I would have to lose a game sometime. It just doesn't happen. But I'm calling it 90% win rate. It is probably closer to like 95% if I'm being factually accurate. It basically is a deck that does not lose as far as not losing goes. It just doesn't happen. And the reason for that is because it does not care how big your deck is. That is the power of this list. You can play any version of stat spam, which is like 90% of what people are playing right now and what they think are good in the game. Any version of stat spam does not matter because you're getting bounced, right? So you get bounced by Will of Ionia. It's 4 mana. That card is gone. Homecoming, 4 mana. That card is gone. Unworthy Soul is 3 mana. That card is gone. Then after I bounced your things repetitively, I also have stuns to back it up. So obviously when you swing, then after I cast one stun, I also have mana banked for, so when I cast one bounce, I also have mana banked for an additional stun. Then, because you're open attacking, because you're a standard player, I have enough healing to basically deal with the chip damage. Any damage that isn't substantial or matters is just getting healed up anyway in this deck. So basically open attack pressure from standard players gets healed up. Stat spam from standard players gets bounced, and everything in between gets stunned. That basically means I'm not losing any game. If that's what your deck does, if it's some version of stat spam, it could be an Undir deck, it could be a Jax Ornn deck, it could be a Eddy deck, it doesn't matter. Any sort of mid-range stat spam shell that it is not reactive and good and interesting is going to get absolutely destroyed. Certain things like Nidalee, because Nidalee has access to possibly triple counterspell, is going to be much better for you, but because that's an actual deck that is good and I enjoy playing it as well. Something like Nidalee Transform has some play against this deck, but when it comes to just normal stat spam shells, mid-range stat spam, whether it is the Eddy, it could be an Undir, it could be some sort of meme Shadow Isles brew. There's a lot of ways that Shadow Isles can cheat out stats. It does not matter. It is losing to this deck every single time. That is why I built this deck. I built this deck to be a hard counter into everything standard players thought was good. That was the whole point of the deck. And it does that with scary efficiency to the point where it's it doesn't matter who I'm playing against. If I am running this deck specifically, you are not winning because you are dedicated to that stat spam mentality. You are never winning against it. Stat spam is bad in Eternal. Just don't do it. There are too many control tools. So whether it is last season's Bandletree, which I believe someone piloted to, again, top 10 or whatever, which means they would have had a very scary win rate with the deck. And they were using Flocks and Disintegrates and 3 mana hard removal, and that's how they built out their control shell. And now you have me with, basically stuns, bounces, and healing as the hard counter. Either way, stat spam, not great. Really not that good and impressive when you have these combo win cons that can win this consistently. So what is the counter to a properly built counter combo deck that is winning, all of the games? Like basically if I queue with Ryze, you're losing because you're not building your decks. Unfortunately, your mind is stuck in that Eddy world, right? Eddy has basically become such a toxic meta. Like basically the world revolves around Eddy right now, right? So every deck that you build, everything that you do is cognizant of Eddy, and it has to have play into Eddy. And for that reason, because I'm not at all approaching it from that same angle, everything that you play is going to lose to me. That's just how it is right now. The only way to, for example, win is to forget about Eddy. Pretend that Eddy doesn't exist, run a comprehensive aggro package that is good, and, play a Zero Relia that is upgraded with Emperor's Army, and just pretend like you're just playing the game normally. Pretend that Eddy doesn't exist and you're just playing good decks. Just play good decks that function normally and have play, some level of play into a multiple of matchups, and just play the game normally and you will be able to beat me. Just pretend that Eddy doesn't exist, remove him from your mind, build the best deck that you want to build, that functions regardless of circumstance, and you will have a much better time beating me in Eternal with my Ryze deck. If you don't do that, if you don't, pilot, the newly upgraded top tier Zero Relia, or, Annie Jin, or Ziggs Poppy, or just if you don't play any, I forgot about this one. This is Elise Burn, right? So Teemo Elise Burn is considered one of the best decks in the meta. Someone once said that last season Eddy had the highest win rate at 60%. That's a lie. Teemo Elise Burn has a 75% win rate in this format because, again, it is another excellent Eddy punish. It is basically, there's two ways to punish Eddy. You punish Eddy on the aggro side with a harsh burn list, or you punish Eddy on the control side with a you don't get to do anything Eddy list. Either one is good. I tend to, right now I'm finding more success on the control side. Other players will find more success on the aggro side. But either one works. I have said that time and time again. Play a good combo list, play a good control list, or play a good aggro list into Eddy, and you are winning the majority of the time. The only time you're losing every single game is if it's mid-range versus Eddy. If you're playing a mid-range deck and you're playing it into Eddy, you're losing every single game because Eddy is just the bigger mid-range list. So that's unfortunate. But anything else, combo, control, aggro, they all function fine into the matchup. I know because I've done it many, many times. The only thing you can't do is essentially mid-range into Eddy. But yeah, so stat spamming, playing the biggest of boys. And if you don't know what a stat spam Eddy shell looks like, I will show you the key pieces. It is basically this guy. So Cloud Drake always comes down on 6. Morgana always comes down on 5. Morgana heals and reduces tempo. Allows the Cloud Drake to come down and then ramp up the deck. And then you play your big thing, which is usually your Spectral Matron. That is like every Eddy deck ever. It's just like Morgana, Cloud Drake, probably maybe a Mobilize in hand, and then a Spectral Matron, either pulling out a Heisho or a Cythria. That is every, stat spam deck ever. And yeah, it's big. It's big numbers, absolutely. But again, in Eternal, where you have things like properly built combo decks, properly built control decks, properly built aggro decks, you have that full range of motion when it comes to building your lists. Eddy is not a big deal, unless you are specifically playing mid-range into Eddy and then you just auto-concede. Then it's the biggest of deals, because then you just hit the concede button and then don't play that deck anymore. You just don't play mid-range right now, basically. It's kind of sucks. This is the thing about Eddy that I'm talking about, where it's like, not only is Eddy bad for you as a deck brewer because you can't play mid-range, it's also bad because everyone else is trying so hard to beat Eddy that I can just feast on them from taking an out-of-the-box approach like Ryze. Because, again, all their decks are designed to have play into Eddy, while my deck is designed to beat everything that is part of the Eddy meta. Whether it is Eddy himself or it is his gravitational pull on the meta, this Ryze deck is beating all of it. Any variation of stat spam, which is usually people's response, is like, oh, Eddy spam stats, therefore I have to build a deck that can also spam stats, otherwise I don't get play into Eddy. That is a fallacy. You can come at it from aggro, you can come at it from control, you can come at it from combo. All three pillars of the quadrangle of play all have play into Eddy. regardless of circumstance. But yeah, again, it's also problematic because everyone who's trying to beat Eddy by spamming stats is also going to lose to me, and that's where the 90% win rate comes from. Just like I just don't lose because everyone's playing the same stuff, and they're all playing the game the same way. They're coming from standard, where the game is very limited in terms of what you can do and what you can't do. And then they're coming to Eternal, and I'm like, well, you can just run a deck of nothing but spells, and then you'll win. And that's what I do, and then I win, right? It's just a different way of coming at it. It is unfortunate, though, because your options are limited, right? Somewhat limited. If you can't do mid-range, you're stuck on aggro, you're stuck on combo, or you're stuck on control. Those are the three things you can do. You can run, essentially, the kinds of decks that I've seen that play well into the Eddy meta. It is, Kindred decks. Kindred does very well into the Eddy meta. So basically Crumble Kindred. I've showed that off before. So any variant of Crumble Kindred does very, very well into Eddy on the control side. Then we have any variant of Bounce Ionia doing very, very well into Eddy decks. And then obviously various burn lists and combo rally based decks also doing pretty well. But again, any mid-range deck, not so great. Unless it can, compete with Eddy on the stat spam scale. Like an Undir, can potentially compete with certain Eddy lists and have play into that because Undir is a big boy. He's pretty big. He's not as big as Spectral Matron, Cythria, but he's pretty big. But either way, whether I'm facing off against Undir or I'm facing off against Eddy, it doesn't really matter because they're both stat spam decks that put their eggs into one basket, right? That is the thing. So if you want to be good at Eternal this season, because I don't think that an Eddy adjustment is coming, if you want to be good into Eternal this season, you have to play outside of the Eddy box. It's the only way you're ever going to get play on ladder. Otherwise, you're just going to get destroyed by the players that know what they're doing. Run a burn list. Burn is good. Run a rally-based combo list. Rally is good. Run a combo deck. Combo is good. And then run some sort of hard control list. Control is good. And then, yeah, again, variations of the theme. More burn, more combo-based rally potential, more different types of OTK combos, different types of control. These are the things you want to be exploring. Otherwise, yeah, if you want to do mid-range, it has to be a variant of stat spam mid-range because that's the only thing you can play into Eddy. That's the thing. So, like, I just stay away from it. I'm not going to bother playing by Eddy's own rules because then you've already lost. I think the stat spam in Eternal in general is just not that great. Because again, people say like, okay, Eddy's amazing. Well, this deck wins like 75% of games because it's just like a face burn list into Eddy, and it does its job very well. So like, if this is winning like 75% of games, and it is officially tallied to win 75% of games on Runeterra AR, like you can take that stat right off there. That's not my own number. That's the number of the player from Runeterra AR winning 75% of games with at least burn. I'm winning 90% of games with Ryze OTK. These decks that are sufficiently different from the stat spam race are the decks that are winning more. So by definition, they are better decks in this particular meta. Maybe not better decks overall, but better decks in this meta. You are better off running the burn, you're better off running the rally, you're better off running the combo OTK, you're better off running the control, in my opinion. And again, there's no one really better than me at this meta, or at this format, so I think that means something. But in general, yeah, Spectral Matron stat spam, it's good. Like again, it's good enough to be meta warping, right? Like this card is good enough to be meta warping in Eternal when combined with Eddy, and we already know that Eddy needs a love tap. So again, if something is that good, then obviously it's good, but it's exceptionally linear and limited in terms of what it can do. And therefore, the decks that can go around what it's trying to do are, in fact, better decks by definition. So whether it is the 75% win rate burn list that is posted on Runeterra AR, and that's old numbers, so this season there'll be something else. Those are old numbers, 75% win rate with burn on Runeterra AR into Eddy, basically just feasting on Eddy over and over and over again. Doing the exact same thing I'm doing, which is feasting on various versions of stat spam decks over and over and over because they're all the same deck in my mind. you know, I'm winning 90%, that deck was winning 75%, and then I believe the top player for Bandletree was probably showing, you know, quite high numbers as well. I don't know exactly what his win rate was, but I'm sure it was very high. That's an OTK deck as well. So by definition, those decks are better. They are actual decks. Stat Spam isn't really a deck. It's a mid-range punish that says no matter what, I am bigger than you. I am the biggest of bullies in the mid-range slot. And it's like, yes you are. But it turns out that there's like 3 other angles of the play space that exist and can potentially beat you on their terms. Which is why Stat Spam just isn't that good in Eternal. This is Eternal King, signing out.